The first thing Jack Moran noticed about the galaxy was that the food was terrible. Not terrible in the way Earth food could be terrible, but at least bad food still had some kind of punch to it, some kind of flavor that hit you in the gut and made you feel alive. No, this was a different kind of terrible. This was food that tasted like someone had taken every interesting thing about eating and carefully, surgically removed. Jack stood in the middle of Vareth 9 space station, surrounded by aliens of every shape and size he could imagine, and some shapes he absolutely could not imagine, and all he could think about was how badly he wanted a plate of his mother's chicken curry, the kind that made your eyes water and your nose run, and your whole body feel like it was on fire in the best possible way. But there was no curry here. There was no fire here. There was nothing here that made him feel anything at all. He had been on Vareth 9 for 3 days now. A cargo escort job. Simple. Work, move the crates, watch the crates, make sure nobody steals the crates. The kind of job that paid just enough to keep you going and bored. You just enough to make you question every decision you had ever made. The station itself was enormous, a city floating in the black between 6 major alien trade routes. Thousands of species passed through every cycle, buying and selling and arguing and eating. The Chirrut were there with their 4 arms and their clicking mandibles and their chemical sensors that could smell alive from across a room. The Morvathi towered over everyone else. Crystalline beings that looked like someone had carved a cathedral out of living glass. The Draenei were built like tanks covered in thick amphibious skin, with jaws that could crush metal. And then there were the humans, small, soft, fragile looking, new to the galactic stage and not particularly impressive to anyone who bothered to look. Jack did not mind being unimpressive. He had spent most of his life being unimpressive. He was average height, average build, with a face that was easy to forget and a personality that was easy to like. He smiled a lot. He laughed at bad jokes. He carried a battered tin of homemade chili flakes in his jacket pocket, because his sister Sarah had made them for him before he left Earth, and he had promised her he would never eat a boring meal again. That promise was getting harder to keep. On the 4th day, Jack found the 1,000 Tastes. It was the most famous food stall on Vareth 9, run by a Chirrut named Tyvelk, who had 4 arms and an ego the size of a small moon. Tyvelk had spent 40 years collecting recipes from across the galaxy, and he was proud of every single one. He could prepare dishes from 200 different worlds, and he wanted everyone to know it. Jack walked up to the counter and looked at the menu, which was projected in a holographic display that listed dishes in 30 different languages. He could not read most of them, but the universal translator in his ear gave him the basics. Everything sounded bland. He looked at Tyvelk, who was watching him with the polite disinterest that food vendors reserve for customers who are probably going to order the safest thing on the menu. Jack smiled and said, "What is the spiciest thing you have?" Tyvelk tilted his head. His antennae twitched, which Jack had learned was a sign of mild amusement. The Chirrut clicked something that the translator turned into "You are human." "Yes," Jack nodded. Tyvelk made a sound that might have been a laugh and said, "Then perhaps you would enjoy the Volhari ember broth. It is our most aggressive dish." "How aggressive?" Tyvelk leaned forward, and his compound eyes caught the light in a way that made them look like they were glowing. "It requires a signed liability waiver," he said. "It is classified as a level 7 chemical irritant on the Galactic Food Safety Index. Anything above level 8 is legally a weapon." Jack blinked. "That sounds perfect." Tyvelk stared at him for a long moment. Then he reached under his counter and pulled out a small tablet with a legal document on it. He pushed it toward Jack. The waiver was 3 pages long. Jack skimmed it. The words "severe chemical burns and potential organ failure and not responsible for death" jumped out at him. He signed it. Tyvelk prepared the broth personally. Jack watched him work with the careful, precise movements of someone handling something dangerous. The broth itself was a deep red, almost black, and it moved in the bowl like it was alive. Steam rose from it in thin, angry curls that seemed to claw at the air. Tyvelk placed it in front of Jack, and stepped back. The food court had gone quiet. Jack had not noticed when it happened, but at some point, every alien within visual range had stopped what they were doing and turned to watch a Chirrut medic at a nearby table. Half rose from their seat, one hand already reaching for their emergency kit. A pair of Draenei soldiers were staring with their jaws slightly open. Two Morvathi diplomats had paused their conversation and were watching with the kind of calm, focused attention that predators give to something interesting. Jack picked up the spoon. He dipped it into the broth. He brought it to his lips. He tasted it. The heat hit him immediately, a wave of fire that rolled across his tongue and down his throat. It was sharp and mean, and it had teeth. It bit into him like it was angry, like it was trying to hurt him, like it had a personal grudge. Against the inside of his mouth, his eyes watered just a little, his nose tingled. He swallowed, and then he frowned, not in pain, not in distress, not in the way that every single alien watching him expected him to frown. He frowned the way a man frowns when he orders a hot coffee and gets a warm one. The way a man frowns when he expected thunder and got a light drizzle. He looked up at Tyvalk. Entire food court was holding its breath. 300 aliens across 40 different species, all frozen, in place waiting to see if the small soft human was about to collapse or scream or die. Jack put the spoon down. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his battered tin of chili flakes. He opened it. He sprinkled a generous helping into the broth. He stirred it. He took another sip. Then he looked at Tyvalk with genuine disappointment in his eyes and said, "Do you have anything hotter?" Silence that followed was so deep and so complete that you could hear the station ventilation system humming 3 decks away. Tyvalk's antennae went flat against his head, which Jack did not know was a sign of deep primal confusion, the kind that Chirrut experienced when something fundamentally broke their understanding of how the universe worked. Medic sat back down slowly. The Draenei soldiers looked at each other, and across the food court at a corner table, a Morvathi diplomat named Counselor Dreth Soma lowered her data tablet and looked at Jack Moran with sudden, sharp, dangerous interest. Something had just shifted, something small and quiet and invisible, but something that mattered. A human had just drunk poison and asked for seconds, and the galaxy was watching. Word spread fast on a space station. By the next morning, every food vendor on Varath 9 knew the story. A human had walked into the Thousand Tastes, signed a death waiver, drunk the Velhari ember broth, and then complained that it was not hot enough. By the afternoon, the story had grown. The human had laughed while drinking it. The human had poured something from his own planet into the broth, something so dangerous that the fumes alone had made a Chirrut faint. By the evening, the story had become legend. The human was immune to poison. The human could eat fire. The human was not actually human at all, but some kind of military experiment gone wrong. None of this was true. Jack Moran was just a man who liked spicy food, but the galaxy did not know that yet. Vel could not sleep that night. His professional pride had been shattered so completely that he felt it in his chitin like a crack running through bone. He had spent 40 years building the Thousand Tastes into the most respected food stall on the station. He had served dishes to diplomats and warriors and kings, and none of them had ever looked at his most dangerous creation with disappointment. He had to fix this. He had to break the human. The next day, Tyvalk was ready. When Jack walked into the food court with his easy smile and his battered tin of chili flakes, Tyvalk did not greet him. He simply placed a new dish on the counter and stared at Jack with all 4,000 lenses of his compound eyes. "This," he said, "is Chirrut nerve fire paste. It is made from a fungus that grows in the acid caves of my homeworld. My people use it in micro doses to test the chemical tolerance of our young. If a child survives a drop, they are considered strong enough to begin training." Jack looked at the paste. It was bright orange, and it seemed to pulse slightly like a heartbeat. He ate a spoonful. His face went red. His ears turned pink. Sweat appeared on his forehead in small shining drops. He breathed out hard through his nose, and his breath actually steamed in the cool air of the food court. Then he smiled and said, "Now that has some character, Tivok." Felt something he had never felt before, a combination of professional respect and absolute terror. Over the next week, it became. Wardyvelk pulled recipes from the darkest corners of the galaxy. A Morvathi mineral extract that was technically classified as an industrial solvent. Jack drank it like tea. Draenei combat stimulant that was meant to be injected, not eaten. Jack spread it on bread and called it interesting. A fermented paste from a species so obscure that nobody on the station could even pronounce. Their name Jack said it tasted like blue cheese and asked if there was more each time the food court was packed. Aliens came from every corner of the station to watch. Some placed bets. Most bet on the human dying. Nobody collected it. It was on the 6th day that Garvik arrived. Jarvik was a Draenei warrior caste veteran, 7 feet tall, covered in battle scars, with skin like whetstone and jaws that could bite through steel cable. He had fought in 3 border wars, survived a hull breach that killed 20 of his squad, and once ripped a leg off a combat robot with his bare hands. He walked into the food court and every alien in the room made space for him, not out of politeness but out of the same instinct that makes small animals move away from large. Predator Sharvik walked straight to Jack and looked down at him with eyes like black stones. "You," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. "You are the human who eats poison." Jack looked up at him, and he had to look a long way up, and said, "I am the human who eats food that happens to be a little spicy." Garvik did not smile. Draenei did not really smile. What they did was pull their lips back to show their teeth, which on a Draenei was less a smile and more a threat display. The Valhari Ember broth, he said, is a sacred trial of my people. Young warriors drink a single drop to prove their strength. You drank a bowl. He leaned closer, and his shadow covered Jack completely. You either have secret implants, human, or you are a liar. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrinkled pepper. It was dark red and ugly, and it looked like something that had dried out and died a long time ago. "This," he said, "is called a ghost pepper. It grows on my planet. It is one of the hotter ones, but not the hottest." He held it up. "Want to try?" Garvik snatched it from his hand and bit off a piece. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Garvik's eyes went wide. His entire body locked rigid, every muscle freezing at once, as if someone had poured concrete into his veins. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His skin, which was normally the color of wet granite, turned a shade of dark purple that Jack had never seen on a Draenei before. He made a sound like a ship engine failing and crashed backward into a table, sending food and plates flying in every direction. The station medic was there in seconds, pumping Garvik full of chemical neutralizers, while the massive warrior lay on his back, gasping like a fish on land. Jack knelt beside him, genuinely worried. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have told you to start with a smaller piece." Garvik grabbed Jack's arm with a hand that could crush bone and pulled him close. His eyes were streaming. His body was trembling. But his voice, when it came, was filled not with anger, but with something that sounded terrifyingly like all what. He whispered, "What are you?" It took Garvik 2 hours to fully recover, and when he did not attack Jack. He did not threaten him. He walked back into the food court and announced to everyone present that Jack Moran was from this moment forward an honorary tongue of iron, a Draenei title so rare and so respected that some clans had not awarded it in over a century. It was meant for warriors who survived poison trials. Jack had passed one without even knowing he was taking it. That night, a small, nervous alien named Lysic came to Jack's quarters. She was a Quillari, short and covered in soft fur, with large dark eyes that always looked slightly frightened. She had been assigned as Jack's station liaison and translator, and she was carrying a data tablet and trembling. "I found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was researching your biology to understand how you survived the trials, and I found something." She turned the tablet toward him. The Screen showed a molecular diagram of capsaicin, the chemical compound that made peppers hot. Beside it was a Galactic toxicology report, and every line was red. Jack looked at it. Capsaicin, she said, and her voice cracked, is classified as a Class 3 neurotoxin. It evolved in Earth plants specifically to cause pain and prevent animals from eating them. It targets nerve receptors and triggers an intense burning sensation that is meant to be a warning signal. A signal that says, stop eating this immediately. You are being hurt. Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, that's what makes it spiciest. Stared at him with her huge dark eyes, and he could see that she was not just nervous. She was afraid. Not of him exactly, but of what he represented. Your species, she whispered, did not stop eating it. You did not avoid the pain. You bred the plants to produce more of it. You created thousands of varieties, each one more painful than the last. You put it in everything. You feed it to your children. She paused, and her next words came out as barely a breath. You enjoy the pain. Jack opened his mouth to argue, but stopped, because she was right. Galactic presented her findings to Tyvalk and Garvik the next morning in a small room behind the food court. She spoke in a voice that shook the entire time, and by the end of it, the room was silent. Tyvalk stood perfectly still, all four arms folded against his body. His antennae were pressed so flat against his skull that they were almost invisible. Galactic sat in a chair that was too small for him and stared at the wall with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the universe had just been politely destroyed. The human does not resist the pain, Tyvalk said slowly. No, Galactic said, he seeks it out. Yes, because he enjoys it. She swallowed. Yes. Tyvalk looked at Garvik. Garvik looked at Tyvalk. And in that shared look between a master chef and a veteran warrior was the same thought. What kind of world creates a species that falls in love with the thing that is trying to kill them, and what else are they willing to enjoy? 2 hours later, Counselor Dreth Soma, a towering crystalline Morvathi diplomat who had been quietly watching everything from the shadows, sent a single message to Jack's quarters. It said, I would like to have dinner with you, Corporal Moran, and at the bottom in smaller text it said, I have questions about your species that I am not sure I want the answers to. Counselor Dreth Soma was 9 feet tall and made of something that looked like living crystal. Her body caught light and broke it into soft colors that shifted when she moved, like a sunset trapped inside glass. When she sat across from Jack in her private dining chamber, she looked like a cathedral that had decided to have a conversation. Jack felt very small. He had brought food, a curry he had made in his quarters using the last of his emergency spice kit, and some alien vegetables that he had determined through trial and error would not kill him. The curry was dark and thick, and it smelled like home, and the moment he opened the container, 2 chemical hazard alarms went off in the corridor outside. Dreth Soma watched him silence. The alarms with the tired patience of a man who had done this before. She ate her own meal, which consisted of carefully arranged mineral shards that she placed into a slot beneath her jaw, where they dissolved with a soft chiming sound. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Then Dreth Soma spoke, and her voice was like wind moving through crystal tubes, deep and resonant and beautiful in a way that made Jack's chest ache slightly. I have been studying your species, Corporal Moran, she said. I have been doing so since before you arrived on this station. The Morvathi High Council commissioned a full biological and cultural assessment of humanity 80 months ago. Jack swallowed a bite of curry. Why? Because you frightened us. Jack almost laughed. He was a cargo escort. He weighed 180 pounds. He had once thrown out his back, sneezing too hard. He said, your species, she corrected. And then she began. She had a list. She presented it the way a scientist presents evidence, calm and precise and completely without emotion, which somehow made every single item on the list hit harder than if she had been screaming humans. She said, consume ethanol recreationally. It is a solvent. It is used across the galaxy to sterilize medical equipment and to strip paint from ship hulls. Your species drinks it at celebrations. You give it to each other as gifts. You have built entire economies around its production, Jack. Opened his mouth, but she was not finished. Your species consumes capsaicin, which, as I understand, you already know is a neurotoxin that evolved specifically to cause pain. You have not merely tolerated this. You have cultivated it. You have competitions to see who can consume the most painful varieties. You feed it to your young. She paused, and the light inside her shifted to something cooler. Your species keeps as domestic companions animals that are apex predators. The creatures you call dogs are descended from wolves, pack hunters with jaws designed to crush bone. You invited them into your homes. You sleep beside them. You trust them with your children, Jack. Wanted to say something in defense of dogs, but Drethsoma continued. Your homeworld is classified in our databases as a Category 7 death world. It has extreme temperature variance from -60 to +50 on your temperature scale. It has tectonic instability that tears the ground apart, rotating storms of wind and water that flatten cities. Oceans filled with predators that have existed largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years because they were already perfect killing machines. And parasites, Corporal Moran. Your world has parasites that live inside other parasites. She leaned forward, and the light in her crystalline body flickered like a candle in wind, and you refused to leave it. You had every reason to abandon Earth. You had the technology to seek gentler worlds. Instead, you stayed. You built cities in earthquake zones. You built homes in the paths of hurricanes. You went into the oceans where the ancient predators lived, not to flee, but to study them, to swim with them. For fun, Jack realized his curry was getting cold. He took another bite, because he did not know what else to Dodrith. Soma watched him eat, and something in her expression shifted. It was not fear exactly. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of a very tall cliff, looking down and realizing the drop was much farther than they had thought. Your species practices what you call extreme sports, she said. You throw yourselves from aircraft. You climb vertical rock faces with no safety equipment. You strap yourselves to boards and ride ocean waves that are taller than buildings. You do these things not for survival, not for resources, not for territory. You do them because the fear and the danger make you feel alive. She paused. Your immune systems operate by memorizing diseases. When a pathogen enters your body, your immune system fights a war inside you. Fever, pain, exhaustion. Your body destroys itself to destroy the invader, and then it remembers, and the next time that pathogen appears, your body is ready. It is a system built on suffering as education, and when you are injured, she said, and her voice dropped lower, you do not always stop. Your body produces chemicals that block pain, that increase strength, that sharpen focus. You'd call it adrenaline. It allows you to continue fighting and running, and surviving with wounds that would incapacitate or kill most species. In this galaxy, you feel the pain later, but in the moment, you simply do not stop. She sat back, and the colors inside her settled into something steady and cold. Your species does not avoid pain, Corporal Moran. She said. You have formed an alliance with. The room was very quiet. Jack could hear the hum of the station around them, the distant thrum of engines, the whisper of recycled air. He looked at his curry, and he looked at Drethsoma, and he felt something complicated move through him. It was not pride exactly, because the things she was describing were not choices. They were just life. They were just what it meant to be human. You ate the spicy food because it tasted good. You kept dogs because they were family. You stayed on Earth because it was home. You jumped out of planes because the sky was beautiful on the way down. He put his spoon down. We are not fearless, he said quietly. We are afraid all the time. We are afraid of pain and death and loss and failure. We are afraid of the dark. We are afraid of being alone. He looked at her, and his eyes were steady and honest. We just learned to keep going anyway. That is not a superpower. That is just being human. Soma regarded him for a long moment. That she said very carefully is precisely what concerns me. A species that does not feel pain is simply numb. A species that feels pain and does not care is dangerous. But a species that feels pain and fear and grief and has learned to keep walking forward anyway. She paused. That is something else entirely. That is something I do not have a word for in any of the 400 languages. I speak. Jack did not know what to say to that, so he ate more curry over. The next week, the station changed around him. It was subtle at first. Aliens who had barely noticed him before now stepped aside when he walked past. Not in fear exactly, but in the way. You make room for something you are not sure you understand. Chiric merchants, who had dismissed humans as soft and irrelevant, began asking careful questions about Earth, about human food, about human endurance. Draenei soldiers saluted him, and he did not know how to make them stop. Garvik walked beside him everywhere, now a self-appointed bodyguard that Jack had never asked for and could not get rid of. The massive warrior had taken to telling anyone who would listen that Jack was a warrior in a merchant's skin, and that his people were forged in fire and ate the flames for breakfast. Lysic, the nervous Kulari translator, followed Jack around too, but for different reasons. She was compiling a report on human biology for the station's cultural exchange database, and every new fact she uncovered made her more terrified and more fascinated in equal measure. Did you know, she told Jack one evening while walking through the station's commerce ring, that you are one of the only species in the galaxy that cries, not from pain but from emotion. Your eyes produce liquid when you are sad or happy or overwhelmed. She looked at him with her huge dark eyes. Every other species finds this deeply unsettling. Jack laughed. Sarno, she said quickly. It is not bad. It is just. No other species is so open about what it feels. Most species hide weakness. Humans leak it from their eyes. The real change came when Lysic told him what was happening in the diplomatic sectors. 3 trade delegations, she said nervously, have adjusted their negotiation postures with human representatives since your incident. At the Thousand Tastes, Jack stopped walking. What? The Chiric Mercantile Union has reduced its tariff demands by 12%. The Draenei Border Authority has offered to extend human shipping lanes by 2 sectors. The Morvathi have requested a formal cultural exchange. She paused. Not because of politics, Jack, because of you, because of soup. Jack stared at Hera. Man-eating soup, he said, slowly changed. Interstellar Trade Police. Lysic nodded. Jack looked up at the ceiling of the station and thought about his mother, who had taught him to cook, and his sister, who had given him the chili flakes, and his father, who had once eaten an entire plate of the hottest wings at a restaurant, because he had told Jack that a Moran never backs down from a plate of food. Then Lysic said something that made him stop thinking and start worrying. There is a problem in the lower docks, she said. A Chiric cartel is threatening a human freight crew. Station security will not help. She hesitated. The dock manager sent a message to the human trade office. And do you know what they said? What they said: send the human who eats fire. Jack closed his eyes. Of course they did. The lower docks of Vareth 9 smelled like engine grease and fear. Jack had been in bad places before. He had served 2 years in the Earth Logistics Corps, moving supplies through contested zones on Mars, where the air was thin and the people were desperate. He knew what danger felt like. It felt like the hair standing up on the back of your neck. It felt like your stomach going cold, and your hands wanting to shake, and your brain screaming at you to turn around and walk the other way. He felt all of that as he walked into the lower docks. The docks were the station's ugly truth. The upper levels were clean and bright, full of diplomats and merchants and tourists. But down here the lights flickered. The walls were stained with chemicals that nobody had bothered to clean. The corridors were narrow and the ceilings were low, and the security cameras had been broken so many times that maintenance had stopped replacing them. This was where the Rethok cartel operative Garvik walked beside Jack, and the Draenei warrior had to duck to fit through the corridors. His massive frame filled the hallway, and his footsteps echoed like drumbeats. He was carrying no weapons, because weapons were not allowed in the docks, but Garvik was a weapon. He did not need to carry one. Elisik walked behind them both. She was trembling so badly that her fur was vibrating, and she had already asked Jack 3 times if this was a good idea. Jack had said no all 3 times, and she had kept walking anyway, which Jack thought was the bravest thing he had seen on this station. The human freight crew was huddled near docking bay 17, 4 civilians, 2 men, and 2 women. Their ship was a small cargo hauler called the Steady Hand, and it was locked. In place, docking clamps engaged departure codes frozen. The Rethad cartel had shut them down, and the message was simple. Pay 60% of your cargo as a passage tax, or your ship stays here until it rusts. The crew looked scared and tired and angry in the way that people get when they know they are being robbed, and there is nothing they can do about it. Jack walked up to them and said, "Hi, I am Jack. I am here to help one of the crew members, a woman with short dark hair and grease on her." Hans looked at him and said, "You are the spice guy." Jack sighed. "Yeah," he said, "I am the spice guy." She looked at Garvik standing behind him like a mountain with eyes, then back at Jack. "Okay," she said, "I will take what I can get." The cartel arrived 20 minutes later. There were 12 of them, Chirrut soldiers with reinforced chitin plating and weapons that were technically not weapons because they were built into their bodies. The Chirrut had evolved chemical warfare glands in their mandibles that could spray a nerve toxin capable of dropping most species in seconds. It was the reason the Rethad cartel controlled the lower docks. Nobody could fight something that could poison you just by opening its mouth. At the front of the group was Rethad Prime. He was the biggest Chirrut Jack had ever seen, nearly as tall as Garvik and twice as wide, with chitin so thick and dark it looked like armor plating. His forearms were folded across his thorax, and his compound eyes glittered with the cold intelligence of something that had built an empire on fear. He looked at Jack the way you look at a bug on your windshield. He said, and the translator turned his clicks and hisses into flat, emotionless words. "Are the human?" Jack nodded. Rethek Prime made a sound that might have been contempt. "I have heard stories," he said. "Stories about a soft little creature that drinks broth and thinks it is brave." He unfolded his lower arms and flexed them, showing the chemical glands embedded in his mandibles. "I am not broth human." Jack felt his heart hammering. He could feel his pulse in his throat, in his wrists, in his temples. Every instinct he had was telling him to run, to back away, to get small and quiet and invisible. He did not move. "I am not here to fight," he said. "I am here to talk about those docking clamps." Rethek Prime stepped closer, and he was so large that his shadow swallowed Jack completely. "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "Your people pay, or your people stay." He clicked his mandibles, and a fine mist sprayed from his chemical glands. It hung in the air between them, a yellowish cloud that smelled like burning metal and battery acid. It was a dominance display. Jack knew that every species had one. Dogs bark, gorillas beat their chests. Chirrut spray nerve toxin. The message was always the same: "I am dangerous, and you are not." The mist hit Jack's face. It burned. His eyes watered immediately, tears streaming down his cheeks. His nose felt like someone had shoved a lit match inside it. His throat tightened and his lungs ached, and for a moment he could not breathe. Around him, the dock workers, the human crew, even Garvik tensed. The Chirrut soldiers shifted forward, ready for the human to collapse, to scream, to beg. Jack blinked. His eyes were red and streaming. His nose was running. He could feel the toxin burning his sinuses like the worst cold he had ever had, multiplied by 10. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He sniffed, and then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his battered tin of chili flakes. He opened it slowly, deliberately, while Rethad Prime watched with the first flicker of confusion Jack had ever seen on a Chirrut face. He sprinkled the flakes onto a ration bar that he pulled from his other pocket. He took a bite, he chewed, he swallowed. He looked up at Rethad Prime with watering eyes and a running nose and a mouth full of fire, and he said that was about a 3 out of 10. My grandmother's salsa hits harder. The doc went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a pausing conversation, but the deep ringing silence that follows a gunshot. The kind of silence where everyone is frozen because their brains are trying to process something that should not be possible. Horrific primes. Soldiers stared at Jack. A few of them took a step back, not because they had been ordered to, but because something in their instincts, the deep ancient survival programming that every species carried, was telling them that this was wrong. This small, soft creature should be on the ground, screaming. It should be writhing in pain. It should be begging. Instead, it was eating. Jack kept his voice calm and friendly and conversational, even though his heart was beating so fast he thought it might crack. A rib in my planet, he said. We have a phrase. He looked at Galactic, stared at him with enormous, terrified eyes. Translate this, he said. We call it fuck around and find out. Galactic made a small squeaking sound. Then she turned to Rethok Prime and translated it into Chiric trade dialect. Her voice was shaking so badly that the clicks and hisses came out uneven, but the meaning was clear. Jack continued, still eating his ration bar, still maintaining eye contact with something that could kill him without breath. Human ships in this sector are few right now, he said. That is true. But here is something you should know about humans. When one of us is threatened, we do not send diplomats first. We do not send lawyers, we send friends and human friends. He took another bite, tend to show up angry and in groups. He paused and let that settle. And we enjoy things that are supposed to hurt us, he said. So imagine what we are like when we are actually trying. Behind him, Garvik spoke. His voice was low and rough, and it rumbled through the dock like distant thunder. I have seen him eat fire. He said I would not test what else he surveys. Rethak Prime stood very still. His chemical glands were quiet. Now his soldiers had spread out behind him in a defensive formation that they probably did not realize they had formed. They were not preparing to attack. They were preparing to retreat. Because the math had changed. Rethok Prime had built his empire on being the most dangerous thing in any room. His weapon was fear, and his tool was pain. And for years, that had been enough. Nobody challenged a creature that could poison you with a breath. But if now he was standing in front of something his instincts could not process, a creature that had taken his best weapon, his neurotoxin, his most primal display of dominance, and treated it like a seasoning, not with bravery, not with rage, not with the desperate courage of a cornered animal, with mild disappointment. That was the thing that broke the standoff, not strength, not threats. The calm, bored certainty of a man who had been in more pain than this before breakfast. Rethok Prime clicked something to his soldiers, and they turned and walked away. 12 Chiric soldiers and their leader filing out of the dock without a word. The docking clamps released with a heavy thunk, and the departure codes unlocked on the steady hands console. The woman with the short dark hair and the grease on her hands stared at Jack. Did you just? She started. Yeah, Jack said. I think I did. She looked at the ration bar in his hand. Was that actually spicy? Jack looked down at it. Honestly, he said, not really. I just needed something to chew on so I would not throw up from the neurotoxin. She stared at him for a long moment. And then she laughed, and then everyone was laughing. Garvik, Galactic, the whole crew laughing with the wild relief of people who had just watched something impossible happen. Jack laughed too. And then he went back to his quarters and sat on the edge of his bunk, and his hands would not stop shaking. He sat there for a long time in the dark, feeling his heart slowly come down from wherever it had been trying to escape to who he called his sister. Hey, Sarah, he said, and his voice cracked just a little. You would not believe the week I've had. She asked him what happened. He told her about the broth and the pepper and the Draenei warrior and the diplomat and the neurotoxin and the standoff and the cartel leader who walked away because a human ate a ration bar. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Jack, are you okay? And Jack, who had stared down a chemical weapon and bluffed a crime lord and become a legend on an alien space station, felt his eyes fill with tears. Not from spice, this Time I was so scared, he whispered. No, she said, I did not show ID. No, she said again, you never do. You idiot, Jack jaffed, and it was wet and shaky and real. That was the thing about humans. They were never not afraid. They just kept going anyway, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. 3 months later, Jack Moran packed his bag. It did not take long. He had never been a man who carried much, a few changes of clothes, his data tablet, a photograph of his family that he kept in a hard case because he was sentimental in the way that men are sentimental when they pretend they are not, and the battered tin of chili flakes, which was almost empty, now the red dust inside, reduced to a thin layer at the bottom that he could see through if he held it up to the light. His freight contract was done. The crates had been moved. The crates had been watched. No one had stolen the crates. The job was finished and it was time to go home, but the station he was leaving was not the same station he had arrived at, and neither was HFY had changed. The 1,000 tastes in ways that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. There was a new section on the menu, now separated from the rest by a thick red border and a warning label that took up half the display. It was called the Human Winged. Served dishes made with imported earth spices, capsaicin-based sauces, calibrated to various alien tolerances starting at level 1, which was described as a gentle warmth suitable for most carbon-based life, and going all the way up to level 10, which was described simply as human standard, and which required the same liability waiver that the Valhari ember broth used to require. The human wing was the most popular section of the menu. There was a waiting list. 3 weeks long. Aliens from across the station lined up every day to test themselves against the spice, not because they enjoyed it. Most of them did not, but because there was something about it that called to them, something about voluntarily walking into pain and surviving. That made them feel more alive than they had felt before. Valk did not fully understand this, but he understood business. He had hired Lissick as a danger consultant. Her job was to assess each customer's biology, review their species tolerance levels, and assign them an appropriate spice rating. She took the job very seriously. She had created a 40-page safety manual, and she updated it weekly. She had also tried level 1 herself, once just to understand what the humans experienced. She had cried for 20 minutes and then immediately asked to try level 2. Valk watched this happen and felt something shift inside his chitin, something he did not have a name for, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Hark had gone further. The Draenei warrior had spent weeks after the standoff thinking about what he had witnessed. Not just Jack's tolerance for pain, but something deeper, something about the way Jack had stood in front of a creature that could kill him and chosen not to run. Not because he could not feel fear, but because he had decided that fear was not going to make his decisions for him. Garvik had formally petitioned his clan leadership to open a warrior exchange program with human military forces. His argument was simple and devastating. They train their children to endure what would kill our veterans, he wrote. Imagine what we could learn. The petition was under serious review. The Draenei War Council had initially dismissed it, but then someone had forwarded them the security footage from the lower docks, the footage of a human cargo escort eating a snack while a Chirrut crime lord sprayed neurotoxin in his face. The Majkabadan War Council watched it 7 times. They approved the petition counselor. Dreth Soma had been the busiest of all. She had spent the 3 months since her dinner with Jack writing a strategic assessment for the Morvathi I Council. It was 200 pages long. It was classified at the highest level, and its core thesis had leaked within a week because someone on the council had been so alarmed by it that they could not keep it to themselves. The thesis had become a meme in diplomatic circles across 3 sectors. It was quoted in trade negotiations and military briefings and academic papers, and it said this: do not engage humanity in a war of attrition. They will treat it as a hobby. Dreth Soma had not meant it as a joke, But she had not corrected anyone who laughed at it either, because sometimes the funniest things are the truest, and the truest things are the most. Terrifying Galactic had changed the most the small nervous Quillari, who had trembled at every loud noise and flinched at every sudden movement, had applied to become a full diplomatic attaché to the human trade delegation. When the hiring board asked her why she had given an answer that was still being discussed in diplomatic training programs. Months later, someone needs to explain humans to the galaxy, she said, and someone needs to explain the galaxy to humans before there is a misunderstanding involving hot sauce and an interstellar incident. The board had stared at her. She had not trembled once on his last night on Vareth 9. Jack walked into the Thousand Tastes and found a crowd not just the usual food court crowd. This was something bigger. Aliens of every species packed into the space, shoulder to shoulder, tentacle to wing claw to crystal. Hundreds of them filling every seat and standing in every aisle and spilling out into the corridors beyond. They were there for him. Jack stopped in the entrance and stared. And for a moment, the man who had faced down neurotoxin without flinching felt his throat go. Tidy Velk was behind the counter, all four arms moving in a blur of activity. He had been cooking all day, preparing something special, something he had spent weeks designing. A collaborative creation using the most intense flavors from every culture represented on Vareth 9. Chiric fire fungus drain combat stimulant. Morvathi mineral essence, Quillari. Sweet root and 17 other ingredients from 17 other worlds, all layered and blended and built on top of each other into a single dish that should by all biochemical logic be lethal to every known species in the galaxy. He placed it in front of Jack. It was a bowl of soup, just like the first time Jack looked at it. The surface shimmered with colors he did not have names for. Steam rose from it in slow spirals, and the smell hit him like a wall of heat and complexity and memory. The food court was silent again, just like the first time. Hundreds of aliens holding their breath watching the human. Jack picked up the spoon, just like the first time he tasted it. The heat was immediate and enormous. It crashed into him like a wave, like a wall, like the entire fury of 6 civilizations compressed into a single spoonful. His face went red in seconds. Sweat poured down his temples in rivers. His eyes streamed, tears running down his cheeks and dripping off his jaw. His hands shook. The inside of his mouth felt like a star had collapsed in it. It was the most painful thing he had ever eaten. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever tasted. Every culture on the station was in that bowl. Every species, every world, every history. He could taste the acid caves of the Chiric homeworld, and the deep oceans of Drina, and the crystal mountains of Morvis, and dozens of other places he had never been and might never see. But he could taste them. He could feel them burning their way through him, leaving their mark on him the way the galaxy had been leaving its mark on him for 3 months. He gasped, and then he grinned. Now, that has got some kick, he said. The station erupted. The sound was deafening. A roar of cheers and clicks and howls and chimes and sounds that humans did not have ears sensitive enough to fully hear, but could feel in their bones. Hundreds of aliens screaming their approval in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing in their own way. Human did it again. Jack laughed and his face was red and wet and streaming, and he had never been happier. The party lasted for hours. Tyvalk served food to everyone free of charge, which was so out of character that Lissik checked him for parasites. Garvik drank something that was technically engine coolant and taught 3 human freight workers a Draenei war song that made the deck plates vibrate. Dreth Soma stood in a corner and watched everything with the quiet, satisfied expression of someone who had just seen the future and decided it was going to be interesting. Jack talked to everyone. He shook hands and clasped claws and touched tentacles and bumped crystals, and by the end of the night, he had said goodbye to more friends than he had ever made in one place in his entire life. The next morning he walked to the shuttle. Begarvik was there. The massive warrior clasped Jack's arm in the Draenei farewell grip that was strong enough to leave bruises and said, "You are the Strangest warrior I have ever known. Come back and I will feed you something that will finally make you admit defeat." Jack grinned. You can try. Lissik was there. She hugged him and immediately sneezed 3 times because there was still capsaicin residue on his jacket. She looked up at him with her huge dark eyes and said, "Thank you for being terrifying in the most gentle way possible." Jack laughed and said, "Thank you for being brave. When you were scared," she smiled. "It seems I learned that from a Humandra Soma." Was there? She did not hug. She did not clasp. She gave a formal Morvathi nod of respect, which Jack had been told was an honor that most species never received. She looked at him with her crystalline eyes and said, "The galaxy will remember you, Corporal Moran, not for what you ate, but for what you showed us about what it means to keep going." Jack nodded and his eyes stung, and he told himself it was leftover spice. He boarded the shuttle. He found his seat. He stowed his bag. He sat down and pulled out the battered tin of chili flakes and held it in his hands. The tin was warm from his pocket, dented and scratched, and nearly empty. Sarah had made these for him a year ago in their mother's kitchen, laughing while she ground the peppers and coughing. When the dust got in her eyes, she had pressed the tin into his hands at the spaceport and said, "Do not you dare eat a single boring meal out there." Jack Moran, he had noted a message pinged on the shuttle's console. Jack opened it. It was from Tavelki AIM. "Importing Carolina Reapers," it said. "What have you done to me, human?" Jack laughed so hard that the shuttle pilot turned around to check if he was okay. He opened a new message to his sister. "Hey, Sarah," he typed, "send more spice. I think I just started something." Closed the tin and put it back in his pocket. He leaned back in his seat and looked out the viewport at Vareth 9 shrinking behind him. City of lights and life and 1,000 species, all trying to figure each other out. He smiled. Somewhere out there, a galaxy full of aliens was learning what humans had always known: that pain is not the enemy, that fear is not the end, that the hottest fire does not destroy you. It shows you what you are made of, and what humans are made of has always been simple. They are made of the choice to keep going even when it burns, especially when it burns. Jack Moran closed his eyes and flew toward home, and behind him, the galaxy burned a little brighter than before.